You know, I'm going to remarry your sister who inherited the entire fortune. Poor losers like you should just disappear. Haha.
My husband blurted this out with a grin, while my sister was conspicuously leaning against him. Sis, it's so pathetic how I've stolen both the inheritance and your husband from you. Oh, it feels so good to take what's yours. We're going to live happily with our dad's fortune from now on. My sister told me this with an ecstatic expression on her face.
Your old man left you a big inheritance, and you're just letting it go. You're really stupid. What a dumb woman. Haha.
I was so mad at my husband and sister for making fun of me, I felt like I was about to explode with anger. Are these two really human? I saw them as monsters, not people, because they were so consumed by greed. Indeed, I had renounced the inheritance from my wealthy father who passed away recently. Immediately after, my husband left me to switch over to my sister who inherited everything. I let out a huge sigh and then said to them, "Fine, let's get divorced."
Oh, surprisingly obedient. I thought you'd cling and beg not to divorce. Haha.
My husband seemed surprised by my response, but I had no love left for him. Why would I not want a divorce? I signed the divorce papers he brought and handed them to him.
Now we can get divorced. I'm going to start a new life as a rich man.
Thanks, sis. A divorced woman like you probably can't remarry, but cheer up. The two of them burst into laughter. Thus, we were divorced, and 3 months had passed when I received incessant calls from my ex-husband. Looking at the massive number of missed calls from him, a smile unwittingly appeared on my face. Realizing it now, it's too late. My name is Kristen. I'm 35 years old. I've been married to my husband, Ryan, who is 3 years older than me, for 10 years living as a working couple. We have an 8-year-old son named Sean. Sean used to be clingy when he was younger, but has become more independent lately, managing on his own quite a bit. Ryan had helped with childcare for about a year after Sean was born. Back then, he could be called a hands-on dad, actively helping out. However, his cooperation dwindled after Sean turned 1, eventually doing nothing at all. Sean was a child who cried a lot at night, continuing even after he turned 1.
Shut up. Why does he keep crying at night? Is there something wrong with him?
Ryan yelled, exasperated. Don't say such horrible things. It's not uncommon for kids to cry at night until they're about 1.5 years. Don't say things like there's something wrong with him, I retorted, infuriated by Ryan's harsh words.
Whatever. I just can't find Sean cute anymore. I could have adored him if he didn't cry all the time. Since he keeps crying, make him stop. It affects my work tomorrow.
Ryan seemed to be struggling with Sean's night crying. His lack of cooperation and childcare seemed largely due to this. I tried everything to soothe Sean to sleep, rocking him or even taking him for drives. Ryan always gave me a tired look.
You know, looking at you ticks me off. Acting all desperate with childcare on your own, it's annoying.
I sometimes fought back against Ryan's verbal abuse, but the fights became a burden, so I often chose to remain silent. Even then, I single-handedly managed both household chores and childcare, sending Sean to daycare at the age of 2 so I could return to work. After my return to work, Ryan didn't help with either housework or childcare, leading me to a whirlwind of solo parenting. Even when I asked for help, he would say,
I'm tired,
always relaxing on the sofa. I knew it would be better to ask for help from those around me, but I never turned to my parents. My mother had passed away when I was young, and I didn't want to burden my elderly father. I do have a sister, Lindsay, but we have never been on good terms. Lindsay has always had a problem with me for no reason. Lindsay is 3 years younger than me, making her 32 now. Since we were kids, Lindsay could never be happy unless she was the center of attention. She couldn't stand anyone or anything that put me, her big sis, first. One incident with Lindsay that stands out vividly in my memory happened on the day our father bought me a new dress. My favorite dress had become tattered from frequent use, so my father bought me a new one. It was a refreshing sunflower patterned dress. I was so happy, thanking my father repeatedly, who smiled broadly in response. However, this happy moment was soon ruined by Lindsay. Playing alone in another room, Lindsay came running over, screaming,
"Ah, what's with that dress? Why did Dad buy a dress only for you? He hasn't bought me one. That's unfair. So unfair."
"What are you talking about? Lindsay, you got a new sweater and skirt just recently." Despite my words, Lindsay seemed far from convinced, crying and clinging to her father.
"Dad, buy me a dress too, please. It's unfair that only she gets one. Buy me one too."
Despite our father's scolding, Lindsay continued her tantrum. Reluctantly, he ended up buying Lindsay a dress as well. Lindsay always envied me, but there was no truth to the notion that I received special treatment. Yet Lindsay frequently complained,
"It's always Kristen this, Kristen that,"
troubling the adults around us with her selfishness. Many adults often indulged her whims, seeing her as just a little sister. As she grew older, she was told to endure more, but Lindsay always managed to outsmart them and get her way. She often belittled me, boasting that she was more loved by those around us. Lindsay hated me for always calmly rebuking her. Lindsay grew up to be selfish and moved out as soon as she entered university. She's currently living off various people without holding down a steady job. She's not married. I haven't contacted Lindsay in years, and it seems we'll continue to live our lives without much interaction. The last time I saw Lindsay was at my wedding. Lindsay arrived in a white dress so flamboyant it nearly overshadowed me, a clear breach of wedding etiquette she surely knew about. Choosing to wear it anyway, she sneered at me in my wedding dress, saying,
"You don't look good in that. By the way, your face looks swollen. Did you even go to bridal spa?"
I will never forget the look on Lindsay's face as she said those words. During the reception, she drank wine excessively and flirted with multiple men, becoming totally drunk. I haven't seen Lindsay since that day. While I know her contact information, there's been no need to reach out. It seems she hasn't returned home at all either. Ryan and I have considered divorce several times to this point. However, no matter what kind of father he is, he's Sean's only father. I've struggled to make the final decision to divorce. Then one day I received a call that my father has suddenly fallen ill and was rushed to the hospital. I explained the situation to my boss and hurried to the hospital. I also tried to contact Lindsay, but when I couldn't reach her by phone, I sent an email. Soon after, I received a response from Lindsay.
"What? Dad's about to die? Well, he's old. I have a date today, so I can't go to the hospital. Let me know the time and place for the funeral when it's set."
The idea of prioritizing a date over her own father was unbelievable to me. It's crazy how little empathy Lindsay has. Meanwhile, Ryan also arrived at the hospital to support me.
"How's your dad's condition?"
He seemed to have rushed over, panting heavily. "It looks really serious. Ryan, you're worried about Dad, aren't you?" "Thank you." Honestly, I was surprised that Ryan was so concerned about my father. While my father and Ryan weren't on bad terms, they hadn't been particularly close either. In the end, my father passed away. Lindsay never showed up at the hospital, so it was just Ryan and me who saw my father off. "Dad!" As I clung to my father's lifeless body and cried, Ryan was crying excessively as well. It seemed a bit unnatural. Ryan then helped with the funeral arrangements and informed Lindsay of the location and time. 4 days after my father passed, we held the funeral, and Lindsay showed up with a big smile on her face.
"Long time no see, big sis. Let's hurry up and talk about the inheritance, shall we?"
Her voice was so happy, it was like she was going to put a heart emoji at the end. My father was a wealthy man. With our mother having passed away when we were young, the only heirs were us sisters. I told Lindsay calmly, "Today is Dad's funeral. Let's postpone the inheritance discussion for another day. Lindsay seemed dissatisfied, but I ignored her and greeted the guests who had come for the funeral. That night, after putting Sean to bed, I told Ryan, "I've decided to renounce my inheritance." Ryan exclaimed in a dumbfounded voice,
"What? Why?"
"Keep your voice down. Sean might wake up. I've thought this through, and I've decided to renounce my inheritance." Ryan, talking over me, retorted angrily,
"Why would you renounce the inheritance? That's ridiculous. Your father had a huge fortune, right? It's stupid not to inherit it."
"Don't be so angry. Let's calm down. We can't have a proper conversation if you're like this." Ryan's furious response only deepened my mistrust.
"How can I not be angry? I will never accept you renouncing the inheritance. Don't say such ridiculous things, you idiot."
His face turned red with anger, leading me to suspect something. Could it be that Ryan had been eyeing my father's inheritance all along? I decided to ask him directly. "Were you after my father's inheritance? Were those tears just an act?" Ryan snorted disdainfully and admitted,
"Yeah, that's right. So what? Well, it was tears of joy. Thinking about how your dad finally died, I was so happy and thrilled. I thought I'd finally become rich."
Ryan's confession left me filled with anger and disappointment. It's appalling how he could say such terrible things so nonchalantly. The man before me seemed more like a monster than a human. "I see, but no matter what you say, I'm renouncing the inheritance." Despite Ryan shouting,
"You're a real idiot,"
my decision remained firm. Later, I informed Lindsay of my decision to renounce the inheritance, and she ended up inheriting everything from our father. Once it was officially decided that Lindsay would inherit everything, Ryan lost all interest in me. He barely greeted Sean and started coming home later and later, eventually not returning at all.
What happened to Dad?
"Dad is just busy with work. You don't need to worry about anything, Sean." I often had to reassure Sean, who was worried. Sometime later, I received a message from Ryan saying,
"I need to talk to you tonight."
I decided to leave Sean with my friend. I somehow felt that Sean shouldn't be present for what was about to happen. As night fell, Ryan returned home with someone.
"Sorry to intrude."
I recognized that voice immediately.
"Sorry for the sudden visit, big sis."
Yes, the person who came home with Ryan was my sister, Lindsay. The moment I saw Ryan's smirking face, I had a pretty good idea of what was coming. The three of us sat around the table, and Ryan started speaking proudly.
"You know, I've decided to divorce you, Kristen, and marry Lindsay."
"Oh? Is that because Lindsay is inheriting the entire estate from our father?" At my question, Ryan burst out laughing.
"If you knew, why did you renounce the inheritance? You're really stupid. If you had just accepted the inheritance, none of this would have happened."
As I remained silent, Ryan continued to insult me.
"On top of being stupid enough to renounce the inheritance, you're not even that pretty. Lindsay is way cuter. I was surprised when I saw Lindsay at our father's funeral after a long time. She has not only maintained her beauty, but she has become even more beautiful. I thought I had no choice but to divorce you and be with Lindsay."
It seems Ryan made his move on Lindsay.
"Big sis, both the inheritance and your husband are mine now. How miserable are you? Oh, taking what's yours feels so good. I'm going to live happily even for your share."
Lindsay said to me with an ecstatic expression on her face.
"So I'm going to remarry Lindsay, who inherited the entire fortune. You, being broke, can just scram."
Ryan and Lindsay laughed together. I sighed deeply and then spoke up. "All right, Ryan, let's get divorced."
"Oh, you're being surprisingly obedient. I thought you'd cling to me, begging not to divorce."
Ryan seemed surprised by my response, but I had no affection left for him. Why would I not want a divorce? How deluded can this man be? However, I'll be taking custody of Sean. Ryan muttered as if he had forgotten.
"Oh, right. Of course, that's fine. Having a child around would only get in the way of the luxurious new life I'm starting with Lindsay. In fact, I had forgotten about Sean until just now. Oh, right, I have a son.
He's such a despicable man. It was truly fortunate that Sean was not here to hear this. The thought of Sean possibly hearing such words sent a chill down my spine. I suppressed the urge to yell at Ryan and calmly stated, "I will be seeking compensation and child support through a lawyer later."
Why do you want money now if you renounced the inheritance?
Ryan laughed mockingly.
Seriously? You make no sense, big sis.
Both of them laughed at me, leaning on each other.
Well, a couple of tens of thousands is no big deal for me. After all, we're about to inherit a huge fortune.
Don't forget what you just said. By the way, have you brought the divorce papers? Ryan said,
"Oh, right,"
as if he just remembered and pulled the divorce papers from his bag.
"I've filled out my part, so just sign your part quickly."
Understood. I signed my part and handed the papers back to Ryan.
Yes, now we can get divorced.
Thanks, big sis. FYI, you being a regular-looking 35-year-old divorcee might make it tricky for you to find a new partner.
Exactly, just as Lindsay said. Your life is going to be hell from here on. What a miserable old hag you are.
Facing the two of them laughing uproariously, I spoke with a firm stance. We're done talking, so I'm going to pick up Sean now. Could you two not come back to this house until I'm ready to leave? After saying this, I went to pick up Sean from my friend's house. Seeing me, Sean ran towards me with a big smile, shouting, "Mom!" His cuteness almost made me tear up, compounded by the stress I had just experienced. I thanked my friend and handed over some department store sweets I had bought in advance. My friend, sensing that something serious had happened, expressed concern for me. "Kristen, you look pale. Are you okay? Remember, you can always rely on me if you need to." Her kindness nearly made me cry again. After thanking my friend repeatedly, Sean and I left our house. Walking home at night, holding hands with Sean, he hummed a tune and swung my hand back and forth happily. Tears welled up in my eyes, maybe because my emotions were all over the place. This wasn't the time to cry. After all, I didn't need to cry. The ones who would truly suffer were not us, but those two. I decided that would be the last time I cried. From now on, it would be just Sean and me living a happy life together. When Sean and I got home, Ryan and Lindsay were already gone. Soon after, I started looking for a new place, found a suitable apartment within Sean's school district online, and went to sign the lease. It was fortunate that I found something so quickly, as I didn't want to change Sean's environment too much. Thus, having prepared everything for the move, Sean and I left the house. Later, through a lawyer, I demanded child support and compensation from Ryan. I also demanded compensation from Lindsay, but perhaps being emboldened by the inheritance, both paid the requested amount in full. With that money, I established a new foundation for our lives, and Sean and I began our new life together. Sean seemed to love our new home. He also accepted the divorce quite smoothly.
"As long as I have you, Mom, that's all I need."
He smiled at me. Ryan had only been involved in Sean's care until he was a year old, and had been minimally involved since. After my declaration of renouncing the inheritance, he became even more indifferent. So to Sean, having a father might have been inconsequential. I vowed to make Sean happier than ever before. Fortunately, I had a job, and with the compensation and child support from Ryan and Lindsay, financial worries were almost non-existent. From then on, Sean and I led a peaceful and joyful life. 3 months after the divorce, Ryan suddenly called. However, I was at work at the time and didn't notice the call since my phone was in my bag. When I finished work and checked my phone, I realized Ryan had called numerous times. Listening to the voicemail, I heard Ryan's voice sounding desperate.
"Call me back right away."
I laughed dismissively and muttered, "So you finally noticed." Without returning the call, I put my phone back in my bag and headed home. During the train ride, Ryan kept calling, and since I was getting annoyed, I turned off my phone. After picking up Sean from daycare and having dinner together at home, I had completely forgotten about Ryan's calls. While eating, Sean excitedly shared his day at school with me. Listening to him was my favorite thing. After dinner, I remembered I had turned off my phone. Turning it back on, Ryan called immediately. I considered ignoring it, but I was somewhat curious about their current situation, so I decided to answer. Fortunately, Sean was doing homework in another room, so he wouldn't hear the conversation. Hello?
Hey, I've been calling you numerous times. I even left a voicemail. Why didn't you answer until now?
Ryan seemed furious, shouting at the top of his lungs, causing his voice to crack. Can you calm down for a moment? Let's talk more calmly. What's this all about? I had a hunch about what he was talking about, but I played dumb and asked him.
You tricked us, didn't you? You knew about the massive debt your father had, didn't you?
I couldn't help but let a smile slip at Ryan's predictable response.
Why are you laughing? So you did know, right? That's why you renounced the inheritance.
Indeed, our father had more debt than assets. He fell for a real estate scam, leaving him in debt. It was a scheme proposed by his longtime friend, and my father had unwarily gone along with it. And inheriting our father's estate meant inheriting his debts as well. That's why I had renounced the inheritance. Yes, I knew about the debt, but saying I tricked you sounds rather harsh.
I knew it. You did trick us. You didn't say a word to me and Lindsay about the debt.
Ryan seemed like he was about to burst a blood vessel in anger. I tried to explain about the debt when I told you I was renouncing my inheritance, but you just yelled at me and wouldn't listen. Unlike Ryan, I remained calm.
What? Don't make it sound like it's my fault.
It's definitely your fault. Ryan continued to rant really loudly. However, he soon smugly said,
But it won't go as you planned, you know. You wanted to make us suffer, but we'll also renounce the inheritance. Good thing we realized in time.
Huh? Taken aback by Ryan's grand misunderstanding, I inadvertently let out a bewildered sound.
I'm telling you, we'll renounce the inheritance too.
That's not possible.
What?
This time it was Ryan who sounded confused. It's been 3 months since the inheritance, so you can't renounce it anymore. Besides, you've already touched the inheritance, so even if it hadn't been 3 months, you couldn't renounce it.
No, that can't be true.
Ryan's voice was trembling. I'm not lying. Why don't you check? Tell Lindsay as well that you can't renounce the inheritance anymore.
What? What are we going to do now? We're going to be drowned in debt.
Yes, you are, but it's no longer my concern, so I'm going to hang up now. After ending the call, it seemed Ryan and Lindsay ended up struggling with a massive debt and had a hard life paying it off. 3 months later, on a holiday, I was making a lot of pancakes with Sean, enjoying a luxurious breakfast with various toppings. Then, my phone rang. It was from Lindsay. I hesitated for a moment, thinking of ignoring it, but decided to answer knowing she would likely keep calling if I didn't. However, answering now would mean Sean could overhear the conversation. To avoid that, I told Sean, Mommy's going to take a call, okay? You keep eating. And moved to another room before answering the phone.
Big sis, help me.
Even hearing this, there was no way I was going to help Lindsay. Still, I decided to ask about her situation first. What happened?
Ryan is terrible. He's trying to escape by himself. He wants to divorce me even though I said no. He insists on divorcing me no matter what. Isn't he the worst?
According to Lindsay, she and Ryan were currently in the midst of divorce procedure. Due to the debt incurred from the inheritance, Ryan was trying to escape by divorcing Lindsay.
It's awful, right? I never thought Ryan would be such a person to easily abandon me like that.
Well, he explicitly said he married you for the inheritance from the start. You knew he was a terrible man from the beginning, didn't you? You married him just to look down on me, right? I spoke calmly, and Lindsay shouted back in tears.
How dare you say that? You've always been like this, always lecturing me with your so-called logic and looking at me with cold eyes. I hate you so much.
The feeling is mutual. I also hate you. Whether you're in the middle of divorce procedure or struggling with debt, it has nothing to do with me. I'm hanging up now. As I was about to hang up, Lindsay cried out in a panic.
Wait, I'm sorry for saying I hate you. Please, you're my big sis. Help me out. Please give back the compensation, please.
What? Give back the compensation? There's no way I would do such a thing. There's nothing I can do for you. I replied with disbelief.
That's not true. You can give me money, right? Please, I'm begging you. $30,000. No, even $20,000 would do. Just give me some money.
I refuse. Why don't you ask Ryan? Goodbye. With that, I ended the call. Later, it was found that the inherited estate included stocks, but they took a nosedive and made the debt higher. Since Lindsay continued to call frequently, I blocked her number. Months later, Sean and I continued to live our peaceful days, having completely forgotten about Lindsay and Ryan. Suddenly, I found myself reminiscing about Lindsay and Ryan, curious about what had become of them. I decided to hire a detective agency to find out. The investigation revealed that Lindsay and Ryan had indeed gotten divorced. Lindsay, after the divorce, was juggling jobs, barely managing to scrape together enough for debt repayment. Despite her efforts, Lindsay struggled to attract clients in the nightlife scene due to her advancing age, even with her looks. All the men who used to lavish gifts on her during her single years abandoned her after discovering the massive debt she carried. Desperately clinging to those men, one of them, feeling threatened, confessed his affair with Lindsay to his wife. Most of the men Lindsay had been involved with were significantly older and married. A wife, learning of her husband's affair, sued Lindsay for damages, causing Lindsay's debt to further swell. An acquaintance happened to see Lindsay one night desperately trying to attract customers in a cheap dress under the cold sky.
Hey, mister, won't you come have a drink?
She would call out to every man, but worn down by stress, no one paid any attention to Lindsay, who just looked so exhausted. Eventually, she was scolded by a businessman for being too persistent, who said,
"Lady, you're too annoying."
The businessman, soon approached by a younger, more beautiful woman, quickly entered a bar with her. Lindsay, witnessing this, broke down crying. After hearing that story, I couldn't feel sorry for Lindsay. She brought it all upon herself. As for Ryan, after divorcing Lindsay, he seemed to have fallen for another troublesome woman. Unable to escape, he was saddled with a considerable debt. To repay this debt, Ryan started a side job in addition to his main employment. Working tirelessly, his efforts were in vain, as his primary employer had a strict no-side job policy, and he was eventually fired. Now, bankruptcy appeared to be his only option. Reading the detective agency's report, I smiled, thinking this end was fitting for such a despicable man. Contrastingly, Sean and I were still living our happy, peaceful lives, recently having adopted a dog, becoming a happy family of 3. Work was going well, and I had just been promoted. Life was smooth, both professionally and personally, allowing me to enjoy my days filled with happiness.